Right. Welcome everyone to TCL week. Yeah, help me out here. Week 6, 7, 6. Which one is it? 6. Okay. Thank you, everybody. All right. So as usual, let's go ahead and start out with the demos. And I will let anybody who volunteers to go first as tribute speak now.
Yeah, we can go first.
Sweet. All right.
I'll be sharing my screen today. Viet, can you allow me to screen share?
Oops, are you not able to share right now?
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
If you go next to the share thing, there'll be an arrow. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. All right, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yep.
Perfect. I think our Niqua is going to take us through our issue, so I'll let her start.
Yes, so this week, as a user, I want to be able to delete items from my shopping list so that my list isn't cluttered with items I don't want to buy in the future. So the acceptance criteria is in the list item component. It renders a button that allows the user to delete an item from their list when clicked. Clicking the delete button prompts the user to confirm that they really want to delete the item. The delete item function in the firebase.js file has been filled out and deletes the item from the Firestore database.
Perfect, thank you. So I will take us through a quick demo of what it looks like now. So bear with me while I get my screen set up. Okay. So we can come on over to our smart shopping list here. You can see now that we have a button that is rendering for each item that says delete item. Let's just verify we're on shirt over here. So if we want to go ahead and delete our shirt, watch our Firebase over here. You'll see, oh, we also have a pop-up. Are you sure you want to delete this item? Heck yeah. And you'll see over here, it gets deleted. And if we don't want to delete it, so we accidentally click delete item, we can go ahead and hit cancel and everything will stay there. So with that, we can go ahead and move on into our code here. Our Niqua, do you want to start, or I can take us through our handle delete?
Yeah, you can start.
Okay. Yeah, so it's pretty simple. We just wanted to create a button that said to delete the item, and we set an on click onto that to make that function possible. The other thing that we did is we set up that pop-up that you saw using just a very simple window.confirm that asks the user if they're sure they want to delete that item. They click yes or no, and I mean, bada bing, bada boom. That's pretty much what happens. So pretty simple. And then we'll go ahead and jump over to our Firebase, and our Niqua is going to talk more about that.
Yes. So for this, we used the delete item function. We needed the list ID and both the item ID in order to be able to access the document that we wanted to delete. So with this, we just pulled from the documentation the delete doc method, and we needed to pass in the database, I guess, collection name, the list ID, and the item ID. And then we just imported that into the list item file and into the handle delete function. And that's it.
That's it. So if y'all have any questions.
No, so no questions. Just want to comment that the that confirmation window, it's always good to have when you're doing like a, it's just destructive operation like delete. It's like, are you sure? It's like, yeah, it gives you just like that second to decide if you are if this is actually what you want to do or not. So nice job on that.
Thank you.
I had a question that's related to that, which is, I know in your in the issue write-up, there was a comment about how modals are not, what did it say? Like they're fraught with accessibility issues. That was something I didn't know, and I probably would have thought of maybe something like a modal instead of a instead of window.confirm. So I just wondered if either you as a team or even mentors if you learned anything about like what are the accessibility concerns with using modals, because it seems like they're used like all over the place. Yeah, so I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I think we took the tip in our issue very seriously, and we just dove right into the window.confirm. I personally didn't do much research into the modal, so I don't know if or Niqua did, or if the mentors would have anything to add to that.
So typically my understanding, and a disclaimer, limited understanding of modals, is that sometimes the way that screen readers can read focus. So if you're tabbing along, kind of how Viet showed, was it last week? When you have a modal pop up, actually the screen reader and stuff, they don't know to focus on the modal, because there's like a few things that you have to give to the screen reader or other accessibility kind of technologies or assistive technologies to signify, yes, this is the new item that is in focus. So if you're just popping up modal and not handling that correctly, it doesn't know to move the cursor there. And sometimes, like, I think if you don't handle modals correctly, if you're like tabbing through, you actually can't tab through the options of the modal as well. Now, how to actually get it to work correctly, I personally don't know, and I would have to research that. But I think if typically a lot of teams, like my team, we use like a third party, like a library or something like that, that kind of creates styled components for you. And a lot of those libraries have kind of taken accessibility into account. A lot of them usually cop out with just slapping ARIA labels on everything. But that's definitely something that you should consider when creating modals, and if your site is out to the general public.
Thanks. That's really good to know. And yeah, that makes sense that like you can use them, but you have to know how to handle them. Thanks.
Are there any? Oh, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just curious, like, would there be any accessibility issues if like you have your list item that's rendering, and then when you hit delete, it conditionally renders, like within the list item, it conditionally renders like a confirmation dialog, like in the place of the list item? Would that be like, because it's replacing the list item, would there be any like confusion or accessibility issues with that, or is that an acceptable way to do it?
That I don't know. So I don't want to give you a wrong answer. So I can look into it and then we can let you know.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Okay.
Because modals are kind of tricky sometimes, especially if you're like using one hand on a cell phone. Sometimes like to get from where you're deleting, like clear over to the confirmation dialog is, you know, it can be disorienting even for very able users. So
Yeah. So something like on mobile, typically it's like a swipe over stuff. Are you sure? That kind of thing is really helpful. So really good call out there. Yeah, so for this demo, the only one of the couple things that I like to discuss, I think it's a couple things that I put on the PR too. I love the simplicity of this PR. So you could probably kind of put lots of logic all over the place, but it was super clean, and I was like, yep, that's where it's supposed to go. Everything was great. So excellent job there. The only question I had in the PR, and I'm not sure if you all had a time to discuss it, is what would happen if someone tried to delete an item that doesn't exist? Now, on first glance, that probably would never happen because it's that you put in the ID of the item that's on the screen. But let's say you have two tabs open, or two people have the same list open, someone deletes it and someone refresh. What would happen if you try to delete a non-existent item?
Yeah, I looked at this right before we hopped on, and so I'm still kind of mulling that over. That's a really good question.
Yeah, even though that might never happen, you could put in a check for, you know, if the ID doesn't exist in the, sure there's a way to do it. You know, just like a conditional check before you delete. I think Firestore handles it, but I can't remember if it actually does. But it's just like one of those things where, yeah, you could easily throw an error and the user wouldn't know why, you know, unless it was surfaced to them. But yeah, that was a good point that Jen made. Is kind of like these, you know, you do a lot of, I think something that I've learned, gotten more used to over the past year since I've been working is, in my job is that, like, you know, there are a lot of times when you do want to do those conditional checks, even though like it's pretty unlikely that these things will happen, but code gets complicated and sometimes you might be passing in data that you don't need to be passing in.
Yep. Just this probably I would go into the bucket of, I don't know, not necessarily error handling. I guess this kind of goes into the bucket of error handling, but kind of the next step of after like building an MVP or things like that, or sometimes table stakes for your tickets is thinking through kind of what errors you might encounter, what errors the user might encounter, and how you can graciously exit from those errors. So I think the controller, or sorry, the Firebase method that you use doesn't return anything. It's a promise void. So I don't know if an error will ever actually explicitly be spat out by Firestore, but it is something to consider, so that maybe you want to just notify the user, hey, you should probably refresh your list or something. But yeah, excellent work this week. I love succinct PRs. Excellent. Chef's kiss.
Thank you.
Correct. Yeah. So any other questions? All right. If not, then we'll hop on to team 2, team sort.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and Tina's going to get us started.
All right, so for this week, our task was to sort the items on the list. And so we wanted an indicator that tells the user that they should buy the item soon, kind of soon, or not soon, which are those categories that we also had based on, now I'm going to forget what variable it was, but when they're added to the list, how soon they want to buy it. And then also those items that are inactive. And then we want to make sure that those, as we talked about last week, that it's not just determined by color, that we would want to have text or something for accessibility purposes. And the way that we're going to accomplish this is with a compare purchase urgency function in firestore.js. And we want to sort those inactive items last. And then we want to have the items in ascending order of days until purchase, and then alphabetically within each category. And then our stretch goal, the acceptance criteria there is for overdue items. So any items where the date next purchase has passed, but it's not yet in that inactive category. So we would add overdue items to the top of the list and then indicate that in our UI. And so I think we're going to jump over to the live demo. There's a ton in this. We're just going to touch on the acceptance criteria because there's a lot more in there, but those are the basics.
Thanks, Tia. So for the working code, you can see that our items have been sorted by their urgency on the right, and we've used two different UI methods to show that. One is this badge that indicates the urgency. So we have overdue, soon, kind of soon, not soon, and inactive. And then we've also sorted them into these buckets so that they display in groupings. And if I love that someone added this, a certain je ne sais pas quoi. But if we check that off, you can see that we have a new bucket at the very bottom that's purchased. So, and kind of a cool thing that I guess we knew was happening on the back end, but now you see here is that even though we've checked it as purchased, I'm not sure if it actually changed in this case, but it's maintaining this because when it unchecks in 24 hours, then it'll go back up to its not soon bucket. We'll put sneakers down there too. And you can see that sneakers changed from kind of soon to soon when we marked it as purchased. Tina, anything else that you want to add that I missed there?
No, nothing there.
Oh, actually, sorry, one more thing. If we say apples, you can see that if one of the buckets is empty, or if one of the groupings is empty, it doesn't render it. And that was one of Jen's comments on our PR, was that we probably should render something. So like it could just be an empty field, but that way that the user has a visual confirmation that, you know, there aren't any soon items, or you know, if one's empty. So, and then we'll move on over to the code, and you can start us off, Tina.
Sure. So there's still a lot of work to be done here. We did not have time to do our refactoring based on the requested changes. And so we will talk about where we're at this point in time. And then we can also touch on some of those changes that we want to make. So here's our compare purchase urgency function in the Firebase.js file. I'm going to actually skip over that first variable for the sorted data, and Weston's going to talk about that because where we started was with just going through each item in the data and then assigning new properties to each item. So first we assign the property of, and this is, sorry, using our function, the function that was added to dates for get days between dates. We did have to adjust this slightly because there was a small issue that came up with it, but for the most part, we used it as it was. So finding the dates between the last date purchased and the current date, and also for the date next purchase for those current items. So basically here we're assigning, we're using that to assign either inactive or active to the purchase status. So we have purchase status and then urgency category that we want to assign. The purchase status is whether the item is in the active category or the inactive category. So if it's over greater than 60 days since the last purchase, it's inactive. And then of those active items, we also want to have a specific urgency category based on those 7 days, 14 days, or 30 days. And so there's a little bit of redundancy that occurred as this process evolved. And so, but initially, that was kind of the thinking, was like, first we want to sort inactive versus active and have those two absolutely separate categories. And then within that, those day categories. But then as we added these urgency category numbers, there's a little bit of overlap and redundancy. We also had a comment about our magic numbers. So that's something that we will be addressing with the refactoring. And then, okay, so once we have our urgency categories and our purchase status, then we can go down to the sorting. So this is our initial sorting function. So we take the data now with those new properties and we sort first according to purchase status, is it active versus inactive? And then by the category, how many days? And then finally, we alphabetize each grouping by name. So this function, locale compare, was a new thing that we learned. And it's basically just a string method that sorts in the same way that if you were to write out your sort method with a compare function, taking A and B and assigning a value of -1, 0, or 1, and then based on is A higher or lower than B, essentially, for each item. So it's more or less of a shorthand for the same thing that a traditionally written sort compare function sort would do. this just allowed us to write it in a more concise way. And at the time, it also addressed the concerns that I was having when I was trying to chain sort onto sort onto sort, and getting those in the correct order. Did eventually figure that out, but by that time we found this nice, pretty method, and so we decided to stick with that. Now, after this, Weston's going to talk about the next piece, but we realized that lines 228 and 229 are redundant because we now have these categories or these groupings that handle the purchase status and urgency categories. So really the only sorting we need to do at this stage is by name. So I'm going to hand it back over to Weston, and he's going to talk about the grouping.
Thanks, Tina. And yeah, like huge shout out to Tina this week, because when we met, like she had worked through a lot of this and was able to help me understand how this logic works. And it was just super cool to see what she had worked out. She had another version of it too, which was really cool to see how she had initially thought through it and then had this super clean version. So this was really fun to explore and learn about. As Tina mentioned, we also are grouping them. So if we go back up to the top here, I'm sure there's a much simpler way to do this, but what we're doing is creating an empty array calling sorted data, and then we're pushing 6 different empty arrays into that. So it's a nested array. And then at the very bottom, we're taking that nested array, and for each item that's in this now sorted data, we are saying, is that item checked? So is it purchased? And if it is purchased, we're putting it in our magic number 5, which corresponds to purchased items. So it's getting put in that last bucket. Otherwise, if it isn't a purchased item, we're going to push it into one of 5 urgency categories. And so by the time sorted data is returned from this, we have a nested array with groupings of items by their sort urgency. In order to do that, we had to refactor a little bit. So when we go over to our list, in order to filter through that, we had to chain a map function with our filter function so that we're getting inside of those nested buckets before we do our filtering. And then one other thing that we had to do was we needed to map through each of those categories. So I think I had mentioned that if the category is empty, we just don't render it at all. I think we want to revisit that. But here you can see that if the category length is greater than 0, then we're rendering a new component called list item group, and that's just the groupings there. And then finally at the top here, since the item urgency category was something that was going to be shared by a couple of different things, we included a little map here so that we could pass that along. Jen made a good point that if your lookup, I actually don't know the terminology, if it's a map or a dictionary or lookup table, but if it's 0 indexed, then you can just make it an array instead of an object like this, because your keys are already 0 indexed. But if we go to our list item group, this should look really familiar now. We're mapping through our list items in each one. And then one small change that was made to, well, I guess one other thing here is that we're using that group urgency to label each one. And then if we go to our list item, one change that you might see here is that we were wondering how to differentiate the style of each one, and colors and all of that. Those are just placeholders for now. We just wanted to get to the point where each one could have its own style. So as that urgency, that item urgency is coming in, we're removing the spaces so that it can become a class name that we can assign to those items and control the style based on that item urgency. And other than that, it's rendering as it was before. Tina, did I miss anything in my frantic attempt to cover all that?
No, I think that was great. I think just that you did a lot of styling in the CSS, which I think up to this point, I personally had stayed away from any of the CSS files because I thought we were not supposed to do that. But then for this particular PR, it seemed appropriate to get into a little bit of the styling features in order to render, you know, some distinctions for those. So anyway, I don't know if you had intended on sharing any of the CSS, but that was just another piece of it.
Sure. And I did. I also felt that way. And I hope I wasn't going rogue by doing that, but it was meant to just kind of test that things were, that we were actually able to control those different style or the different urgency types. But what we had done was before we made the groupings, we just had a badge so that each so before we broke these down into groupings, we just differentiated it with this badge over here, and we didn't have any color assigned to it. We were using the text so that each item had a badge. And so that kind of left us with two problems. Is it clear for the user if we group them, A, and then B, how can we pass some sort of value that allows us to style these programmatically? But you can see that we've just overdue soon. Those are one words, but kind of soon gets the spaces are removed and it becomes our class name there. So we're just assigning a background color to each of those, and then status is shared between all of them as the little badge shape. I think that pretty much covers it. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, I was gonna say I don't have a question, but this is so beautifully done and so beautifully explained. And you can't see my face right now, but there's a little tear in the corner of my left eye because this is just so beautiful. Like, this is amazing. You guys did a great job. Like, this is really good.
Thanks, Erniqua. It was really fun to work on with Tina.
Yeah, that was a lot to unpack, and great job, both of you, for sorting. Is the sort function itself is like really difficult to wrap it's always hard to wrap my head around. So it was an awesome job there. And I was going to ask about the locale compare, but I think you explained it pretty well. Like, I didn't know why you were, I think, like, I'm pretty sure when I did this, we probably chained sorts together. Did not even know about the locale compare method, so that was awesome. One thing, you mentioned the get days between dates function, and you had to change a little something in there. Like, what was the change that you made?
Oh. So for Tina, do you want to cover this?
I was going to see if I could remember. But I think it was when there wasn't a future purchase date. Was that the one that we had an issue with? That we were having something that was showing up without any status because there was no date. No, sorry. Do you remember? It was the was it because of the date being in the past and getting a negative value?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So the two return statements that we had before both use absolute values, so that no matter what, we're just getting the number of days in between without any kind of positive or negative valence. And then now we just create a new return that if you provide a newer date, so that second argument, but you pass in an undefined for the first argument, then that's its cue to say, oh, I'm going to return the difference between the newer date and the current date without the absolute value. So we actually get a negative value as we would expect.
Got it. Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading through this PR. Thank you for being so gracious and letting me just put a lot of feedback here. But I could only put a lot of feedback because there is a lot of good code going on here. And then kind of the thing that I wanted to ask is, this was actually a rather large issue. And I wanted to kind of get in this team's brain on how did you approach kind of breaking down the problem? Because I can kind of see how you did it through the code, but it would just be probably illuminating for all of us how you broke down the problem and approached it into manageable chunks.
I can start, and then Weston, maybe you can jump in, but I'll go first because I was really intimidated by this issue, and also because I worked on the easier of the two issues the last 2 weeks in a row. So I hadn't been involved with all of the daytime stuff directly. I mean, I obviously participated in reviewing and these discussions, but I felt a little bit like behind the curve with where I was at. And in general, I feel like this whole project is like, it's like just a little bit beyond the scope of my current abilities and knowledge. And so anyway, all of that is just to say that the night before Weston and I had planned to meet, I wanted to just go in and wrap my head around things so that I could actually contribute and not just be like deer in the headlights. And so I sat down and started kind of like, okay, well, when we sit down to approach this together, where do I think we should start? And oh boy, I don't know if that was a good idea or a bad idea, because several hours later, there I was, and I had all of this draft, very messy, code that where I was experimenting with things, right? It was like my practice file. And so initially it was, for me, I think, figuring out how to create some kind of labels or categories for that sorting function. So there was a big mess. And then when Weston and I met, I just kind of shared it with him, and then I don't know, Weston, maybe you can talk from there about how because I think Weston's very skilled at thinking things through programmatically and really like cleaning and tidying things up. So so that was kind of where the process began, and I'll shut up now.
I think it was really that I've never worked with sorting by multiple criteria. So like it was a little, I don't know if overwhelming is the right word, but like when we jumped into the code that Tina had already made, it was like, wow, this is awesome. And it was really hard for me to like wrap my mind around it while we were actually talking. So that was very cool. And like I had mentioned earlier, it was cool that she had done it in a couple different ways. I think one of my biggest learnings this week was that like, I don't know if you experience this at all, Tina, but because I was coming in to the meeting and looking at your existing code, I was asking a lot of questions, and all of my questions were based in like curiosity and like, oh, why did you decide to do this way? And it was really like, I was really mindful of not wanting to sound critical at all of anything that you had done, because that's not what I was feeling. I was just like, oh, like why did you decide to do it this way? And what I thought was super cool about how Tina showed up in that conversation was that, like, because you had done such a good job of researching it and had done such a good job of like thinking through how you approached it, you had like really, really solid answers and like opinions for each of those things. So it made it really easy to like have that conversation, which was really cool. And then I think we kind of went back and forth a little bit on exactly what the acceptance criteria meant. Like there wasn't an explicit ask for a grouping. It was more of language of like, you're going to have to make some UI decisions about how to render this in a way that feels clear to the user. And so I think I came in with a little bias because when I did my first read through it, for some reason I got it in my head, maybe from using Todoist or like iOS reminders app, like those apps all group things. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, like they'll be like, we're talking about ordering by urgency, like there'll be groups. And then Tina was like, well, that's not actually in the acceptance criteria. And I was like, oh, you're totally right. And so then there was like some discussion about how to handle that. And but in the end, we decided to try grouping it as well, and wanted to put it to the whole team about like, do we do the badges? Do we do the grouping? Do we and then we have some refactoring to do based on Jen's great feedback. So.
And just quickly, I'll just add that full disclosure, like we did not limit our, like collectively, if you add up the time that we spent together and individually, we definitely exceeded that 5 hours of time on this particular issue. I know that's something that was mentioned at the beginning of Collab Lab. And so just, yeah, full disclosure.
No, I do want to also point out the two-dimensional array is the way that you're storing, you're sorting the data and then grouping it together into different nested arrays is really interesting too. I don't think we definitely did not do that.
Awesome. Well, awesome job, both teams this week. Both PRs made me happy for different reasons, but made me very happy. So great job, y'all. So what we're going to be moving on to now, if no one else has any more questions, is retro. Woohoo! I'm actually here for one of them for once. Woohoo! So I think y'all have already done a couple of these. So we'll probably be following the same format. Let me just copy in. Oh, nope. I'm doing the Mac commands again. Excuse me. I dropped the link to the retro board right down there, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see? All right, so retros, as you all have done a couple of them, are one of my favorite things at Collab Lab because you can really just, and even at my job, you can really just tell your coworkers or your manager or something, things you love, things you think you can work on, and it's just really a nice, great open space to lay it all out there in a nice constructive way. So I have controls. I have a timer here for 3 minutes, and then kind of we can fill out the retro board. Some teams like to put each column individually and talk about them, but since we're running a little bit short on time, as we always are, I love it that you guys talk so much. It's great. And that's not being sarcastic, that's being for real. We can just kind of fill out the whole board with whatever thoughts you have. And please don't forget to add your name on the card. So when it's your turn, you know it's you. And then, so yeah, just fill out the board. What went well, things to improve, action items. We can probably fill that out together after we've gone through kind of things to improve and stuff like that. But then the other one is give a shout out. So probably the 1, 2, 3 columns, and then we can do action items together. So clear as mud. Yes. All right. So everyone, ready, set, go. All right, so it beeped on me. Let me just stick this retro board back. Please finish off anything else you got to say. And what we're going to do is probably just go top down in each column. And then we can do the what went well first. Weston, I think you're up.
Sorry, I had to find the mute. Overall communication, I've just been, like, we're all new to this paired programming stuff, and it's just been really awesome to see how well groups are working together and how that's evolved over the last few weeks.
Yeah, I have kind of a similar vein. It's like the communication, and also it's really hard in the beginning when you're first starting out to constantly be getting feedback about kind of your code. Just because, like, a lot of the time, at least when I was starting early on, I felt like I was measuring my abilities and like my progress with how good my code was. But obviously that's very subjective and kind of a not very constructive way to think about it. And so I'm really impressed that everyone was able to kind of communicate feedback, one, constructively, and two, have the humility to be like, yeah, that's a good idea. Or yeah, the other team had a really good, like, pointed out something really great. And I love seeing the back and forth there and like the continual growth and learning. And it's only going to make you better developers. Which is excellent. All right, next up is Yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the presentations this week and previous weeks have all been just like really amazing to watch, and just to hear you all talk through your issues and how you thought about the problem itself and the way that you came about your solutions. It was just really cool, and I've been learning just like this week. I've been learning a lot about things that I didn't know existed, like the locale compare function, and I can't remember something last week where I was like, oh wow, that's cool. So yeah, thanks for just doing some amazing work and teaching me new things as well.
I'm next. It kind of echoes what's been said already. Just the communication as a team. I feel like we've made very good use of Slack, and it's also been really easy to schedule our weekly pair meetings. So, yeah.
For me, Jen's mentor reviews, they are just like, they're a lesson in and of themselves. Like, each time I read through each comment, it teaches me something that I obviously didn't think of, otherwise I would have included it in the code, and B, then it's like a lesson that I learn for this project, but then oftentimes things that I can take over into the other work that I'm doing and learning. So thank you for the quality of your feedback.
And then I say communication and reliability of this team again, which I think we've already kind of spoke to both of those, but I just do really appreciate, like everyone said, how communicative everyone is. And I feel like everyone, for lack of a better term, pulls their own weight and shows up every week and, gives it their all, which is really awesome.
Communication is one of those pillars of collabing, which is why we're called Collab. So excellent to see that everyone is really happy about the communication, because this is kind of what this sandbox is for, right? To kind of test out the waters, how to work as a software development. Awesome. Communication. All right. So next, things to improve. Weston, do you kind of want to elaborate? I think we talked about this a little bit, but you want to elaborate on things to improve?
Yeah, and yeah, it was already mentioned, but I think it'll be a good thing for us to focus on over the next couple of weeks as we're trying to wrap things up. It's just, yeah, making sure that we all get to share in that.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good call out, because I think, Arnika, you were the one that pointed this out earlier in the weeks, that kind of sometimes the issues are not very balanced. And so I think for the rest of the time at Collab Lab, it's really great, because I think I was going to say Yolanda because I saw your name right there next to your face, but yeah, we'll probably go over with the issues as the last couple of weeks of Collab Lab is kind of more up to you kind of stuff. And so it's really great that you all kind of recognize that and want to be equitable. Here. So I think action items wise, it seems like since the ball is going to be in the mentees court this week, I won't put any specific action items. It's however you all want to kind of handle divvying up the task yourself. Does that seem fair? Yeah. All right, sweet. All right, so now one of my favorite parts, shout outs. So let's just go top down. See your name? Go. And Arniqua, I think you're first.
Sorry, I was muted and just talking away. I said that Tina and Weston did an amazing job with this week's issue. I can't say it enough, you guys. You did a really great job. I hope you did something special to celebrate this weekend. If not, use this evening to do that.
And again, Tina and Weston, I mean, seriously, you guys killed it this week.
Well, let's just continue this little celebration. Weston was a great partner this week, and also just the quality of work. Thank you.
And I had mentioned that earlier, but I just really appreciate that. Yeah, Tina has this consistent curiosity and often references explorations in the documentation. So I just like anytime I have a follow-up question, I feel like her answers are always opinionated and like grounded in research that she's done, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, I just want to shout out Arniqua and Mariah for tackling that issue in such a super clean way. I don't know, this is kind of silly, but every time I see like code that is like succinct and super simple, it reminds me of Zoolander, where the line's like so simple.
I want to give a shout out to the team just because everyone is so supportive and willing to explain things or just hop in and help.
Yeah, so I think mine are the next ones. I love the demos. I think Viet said this too, but I think usually with teams that I've been a part of and mentored in the past, there usually is kind of like a growth curve of demos on like you just get better over time. But the interesting thing about this group is y'all were very good at demos even from day one. So it's just been a joy to watch everyone's demo. And yeah, you've gotten better, I think, just because you're so used to like talking about code now. But it is a sign of a good developer if you can demo well. And so you all should kind of give yourselves a pat on the back that I really have like no complaints about your demos because everything is explained so well. So 2 thumbs way up, would recommend to friends. All right. Also, same thing, kind of in the vein of communication, but sometimes as a mentor or even being part of a group, it can be kind of a slog. Something like Collab really works well when people ask a lot of questions or are naturally curious or just want to be a part of the team. And sometimes it can be a slog if like everyone's quiet or they're too quiet and they're just maybe like more shy or something. And so I really want to thank everyone for kind of, even if it's out of your own comfort zone, to kind of be more talkative and vocal on Slack and in kind of these recordings, because I don't like being recorded either. But thank you all for kind of showing up, asking the questions, and kind of doing all the things that make Collab Lab a really, really great experience.
It's me, yeah. So to Weston and Tina, just those. I mean, I'm the code is like that you've been writing is like really creative, and it's like I think everybody was like pretty blown away by it, right? And there is beauty in like just these lines of code that you write, and it's like really cool to like see something like of yourself and in it. And I don't know, it's just like really it's been like a pleasure to read all of your code, like not just Weston and Tina, but Arniqua and Mariah as well. Oh, and Jen, yeah, awesome feedback, Jen, on the PRs. I think like giving feedback in PRs is a skill that you do learn over time as well. And you know, it's something that I'm working on getting better at also, but it is really, when I do get a chance to read the feedback that you've been giving, Jen, it's been like pretty awesome to see like how helpful it's been for everybody, me included.
Yeah, just piling on that. Thanks, Jen, for doing such a thorough job of explaining what we can do to improve code. I think it really has led to a lot of learning and is really appreciated.
I give a shout out to Mariah and Arniqua for being so positive and encouraging all the in the Slack and here today. Just really appreciate that positivity.
And again, piling on, yeah, I have really appreciated Arniqua that like you bring a lot of great ideas and collaboration to our meetings, but you also are like super consistent with just bringing joy and laughs in your lovely self. So thank you. And Mariah, for being the queen of clean. When I know we were working together, our last round, you had a moment where you're like, okay, and I'm going to get rid of these console logs and put a couple of spaces in here because I had left a total mess, and you did such a good job of just quickly coming through and cleaning it up and making it very readable. So I always appreciate that your code is very clean and concise.
Awesome. Well, Arniqua said it best. I'm not crying. You are. That was really great. Thank you all so much for bringing your full selves to Collab Lab. It actually is very it's been an excellent experience. So thank you all. Sounds like it's the end of a movie or something, but we're not at the end yet. There's still a couple more weeks. So Viet, do you want to take it from here and we can explore what is going to unfold over the next week or two?
Yep. Sounds good. I think this is where I am. All right. Okay, so the last 2 weeks of Collab Lab are kind of unstructured, unlike what you've been seeing for the past 6 weeks now. So I'm just going to go through the main points since we are kind of running low on time. But even though you are grouped as pairs still, I think the last 2 weeks is really, it is a full team. All 4 of you are going to be working together. Just kind of coming up with a plan on how you want to finish off this project. So we had kind of already just talked about the kind of the theme or the feel of of the app, right? And some examples of this are did you want it to be fun? Did you want it to be clean, ironic, business-like? I think that's up to you to decide how you want to what is the mood of this app? What is I don't know, what's the look going to be? What's the aesthetic? So that's probably first thing that one of the main things that you'll want to discuss with each other. Creating a mood board. If you haven't looked at this yet, it's kind of this. Should we look at it? If we can get that up. Canva's great, by the way. If you haven't used Canva, it's pretty awesome. I hope this goes to a mood board. Never mind. Sorry. But a mood board is basically just this, a board of ideas that you can throw together, how, take ideas from other apps that you like. You're okay, I like the color scheme here, or I get some swatches together. You can put those all on your mood board. Let's see. So just the third point here, decide on the fundamental elements of your design. Yeah, so again, what's the typography? These are very aesthetic design issues, so you've been very code focused for a while, and now it's kind of for whether or not this is fun for you, this is a different kind of this is going to take you to the other side of your brain. I can't remember if it's left or right brain. But typography, colors, iconography, you're going to make these style decisions. And the fourth point is decide whether or not you want to use vanilla CSS or a framework. There are positives and negatives to both. It's something that you should probably discuss with each other. I'm not going to say, I don't want to bias this towards one or the other, but I think it's something that you all together should have a discussion about. I think there are positives and negatives to each. So just to touch on that, you do have more control with vanilla CSS, but you can maybe build faster with a framework or a library. So that's like a consideration you should make. And I guess like the fifth point is talking about the frameworks, the CSS frameworks, right? What are the options? I can tell you that I've looked into or used most of these. And it really depends on like what you want, right? I guess like you may feel that you want to control it better, more control over your CSS, or you may want to relinquish that control, but not be able to manipulate it the way that maybe you want, right? So yeah, so I guess that's it in a nutshell. I think you all have already started putting together kind of like a to-do list of like things you want to improve in the app, and I would start there. I think this is now your opportunity to kind of filter through that list, come up with more ideas, and the board is open for you to write your own tickets now. I would start, kind of gathering ideas, figuring out like which tickets you want to write, or what issues you want to work on, write tickets for those, and also know that you'll probably write more tickets than you have time to deal with, in a sense, right? So like you'll come up with more ideas, but you might not be able to complete it within the 2 weeks, the remaining 2 weeks. Something that I would strongly suggest is that you spend the first half of this upcoming week, brainstorming, and just kind of like come up with an overall plan of what the next 2 weeks looks like, and then like when are you going to kind of like stop, or not stop, but I guess what's the deadline for like what library you're going to use, maybe, right? Or when are you going to start tackling the issues, like, and kind of figure out who's going to do which part of the work that you're going to kind of dog into each other. Yeah, do y'all have any questions?
I have a question. Are we still partnering with, like we had that initial schedule of 2 people partnering per week, or is it now kind of up to us to determine how we pair up and how we work?
Sure.
Or
Yeah. So
we all work together.
Yeah. So like what I was saying is this week, so Tina, you and Mariah are supposed to work together this week, and Weston and Arniqua. And I kind of feel like the remaining 2 weeks it's more open, so you don't have to stick to the pairs as they're written right now. I think it is you do kind of. I would still encourage pair programming, but it's also this. It could be you decide that, hey, we're going to be able to divide and conquer and do a lot more as individuals, but still like come together as a group, and still like work together, do the pair programming that you've been doing the past few weeks. But I kind of feel like this is the sprint right now, right? You've got 2 weeks to deadline. So that might mean that you might be working more individually. And I don't know if mentor review is. Obviously, like we would like to be involved, but at this point, that you're going to be working at such a quick pace that it might be that if you're Tina, let's say like you create an issue and you're working on something, that review, as long as you get Weston, Mariah's, and Arniqua's approval, like that's good enough. It doesn't have to necessarily go through mentor review now. Jen, what do you think? Is that kind of like how you went through your last 2 weeks?
Yeah. I think what would be great though, since we still have like 2 weeks of syncs too, it is very open. And you can let us know if you want us to review the code or not too. But I think maybe even just scoping, and next week we'll see if there's any code. But if you've had like a mood board and kind of what you're going for as the demos, I think just making sure what Viet said was really excellent about making sure you have a timeline and stick to it, because time gets the best of us all. And now that the tickets are kind of up to you, there's a lot of upfront time to actually creating those tickets. And yep, so I think we are there if you need us. And if you don't need us that much, that's okay too. This is kind of so as you can tell, some of the issues on Collab Lab can be open-ended, and this is the most open-ended of all of them, because we noticed that there used to be issues up until the very last week, I think, or the second to the last week, and we found that teams really enjoyed working totally together to kind of implement all these features that weren't originally on the roadmap and things like that. So that's kind of why this is structured this way, to give you all room for more creativity versus just kind of following a lot of tickets. But yeah, so we're here if you need us. And if you don't need us, that's okay too.
But I do, so one thing I would say that that I want to take away from my group project was that we all created a mood board, each person, right? And we met in the middle of the week to kind of compare everybody's. And then like kind of like everybody came up with a color scheme. Everybody kind of came up with like an idea of like the overall like I guess like the mood of the app itself, and kind of like, you know, what just general ideas of look of how they want it to look. And I think that's like a good way to you're not like hiding any ideas from each other, but you're kind of like, you know, it's like when musicians go and hang out in a castle for months to record their new album because like they want to get away from everything, right? This is like your opportunity to kind of like be individuals and then come together as a group and like take everybody's ideas and you know, shape it into like the app you want it to be.
Yeah, one way I found that it was done really well is like in something like Miro, you can create frames, so kind of like your own page, but they're all in the same whiteboard, but you can kind of see as people copy and paste stuff into their frame to see what everyone else is thinking, because I'm sure everybody's aesthetic is going to be very different. So it'll be interesting to see as everybody builds their individual frames for the whole mood board and what you pick and choose for the total. But yeah, we are a bit over time now. Does anyone have any questions for the next couple of weeks? And like I said, I know I'm a broken record, but if you need us and you need some more help in terms of structure wise for the next couple of weeks, we are happy to help, but also we are happy to step back and let you all take the reins. So please use us as much or as little as you would like for the next couple of weeks. And yeah, so if there's no other questions, I think that'll be it.
I have a question and a comment.
Okay.
My question is, so are we no longer doing the weekly demos? Was that no longer?
We still are doing the weekly demos. So I think what I was trying to say for this next weekly demo is that it'd be awesome if you all had code to demo. But if there's like a lot of planning or stuff that you ended up doing next week, because, you know, 5 hours, it's like a lot of time, but also not very much time. So if you end up kind of reaching the 5 hours and you can't put any more work into it and you haven't actually gotten any code out, just presenting the mood board and kind of the plan of what you want to do in the last week would be totally okay for a demo too.
Okay, awesome. And then
Does
I had
that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
And then I had a comment / question to the rest of the team. Do you guys think it'll be beneficial for us to like maybe find 30 minutes to meet to kind of come up with direction of what we want to do next?
I would love that personally.
Okay, next is to try to find a time that'll work for everyone. I'll try to, arrange that. So I'll message you all in Slack.
Yep, and you all have been doing a great job communicating asynchronously too. So I think like synchronous communication just to like plan is great, but keep you maybe like start like a thread or something like that in Slack, or open up a new channel even if you want to talk about your final couple weeks of planning.
Cool, cool. So excited. I'm so excited to see what you all build because you all are very creative. All right. So I think that's it for this week. Viet, you want to stop recording?
Sure, I will stop recording.